So good morning, and thank you for joining Mary on our podcast. And I am so excited to be joined by Dr. York Hsiang again. Dr. York Hsiang, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Well, thank you for having me on again.
So, Dr. Hsiang, tell me, you're in the midst of a very important judicial review in BC, where doctors are challenging, or healthcare workers are challenging, Dr. Bonnie Henry for her persistent persecution of unvaccinated healthcare workers, and in this case, physicians, but maybe all healthcare workers. Can you bring me up to speed on what has happened since Monday, November 20th? What's been going on? Because there's been very little in the media.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. So much has happened. We waited a long time for this, and it's finally happening. So we're delighted to see it. Now, probably for your viewers, I should explain a little bit about what this is all about and to clarify some misconceptions. And so what we have done is that we have filed a petition, which is bundled with several other petitioners to jointly review the actions of Dr. Bonnie Henry. That's called a judicial review. A judicial review is not a trial that you would, let's say, watch on television, in that there are no expert witnesses who get up and testify, and there is no cross-examination of anybody. Essentially what it is, it's a presentation of the views by the petitioner lawyers to a judge who needs to make a decision about what a government body or a government person, in this case is Dr. Bonnie Henry, what she has done. And so when we initially filed the petition, it was bundled together with 3 other petitions. So there are 4 petitions that went into this at the beginning. Because the name of the first petitioner was the Canadian Society for, it's a CSAP group, and it goes in an alphabetical order. That name has persisted as the name of the petition that we're filing. So number one thing is that the CSAP petition has been withdrawn for the judicial review. There is a separate CSAP application that's a class action suit against Bonnie Henry, which is not being heard at this judicial review. Nonetheless, because CSAP, in terms of alphabetical order, preceded the names of all the other petitioners, so if you go and look at the docket of what is being heard, it comes up as a CSAP group. And so that has been confusing for a number of people. So now we're down to 3 petitioner groups. Our lawyer, that's the Gall firm, represents 2 of those groups. And there's a separate petition that's handled by the JCCF lawyers. And so that's what's going on. So what has happened this week is that our lawyer representing CSUM and another group, we went first. So for the first 2.5 days, our lawyer was presenting our side of the argument. When we first started, it was very interesting. I think they found us the smallest courtroom that they possibly had, seating for only 25 people. It became quite obvious when the number of people who were interested in hearing this, probably I would say it's maybe about between 40 to 50, and it was packed. It was standing room only, and it was a great visual. I went down to the, I think they call it the court office, if you like. They're the people on the second floor of the courthouse who assign all the courtrooms. And I said that, is there some way you can move us to a larger courtroom, because there's a lot of public interest in this, and there are a lot of people standing. And so when the court actually started and Justice Coble saw the situation, he was actually, I would say, very kind. And he said that because of this a lot of public interest, they took down the names of everyone's names and their emails of people who were there, and said, well, instead of standing, we're going to send you a link. And so you can just follow this. And then when he felt that that probably wasn't such a great idea, he then requested a short recess, so we got a larger courtroom. So in a way, it's kind of like a little minor win for us, in that we were given a larger courtroom, which now had seating that could accommodate everybody. But the visual of it is that in the larger courtroom, maybe we could seat everybody, but it doesn't look as impressive in terms of how many people are filling up the courtroom as it was with a smaller courtroom. Nonetheless, that's how it proceeded. And I thought that our lawyer had done a very, very good job explaining the situation. In fact, the irony of the whole situation was not did not escape me, in that, whenever we buy, let's say, appliances or new things, there's always a disclaimer that's written in really small script. And it's all in legalese, and it's really to confuse us because no one can really understand that. The irony of it is that when lawyers talk to judges, they make it as simple and as clear as possible. Exactly the opposite of the public when we have to deal with the law. And so what our lawyer was basically saying was he's trying to make it as clear as possible that our petition, and he's representing two petitioner groups, are challenging the government on two issues. One is that, is it still reasonable that the public health officer insists that there is still an emergency in British Columbia, which gives her these extraordinary powers to do whatever she wants to do regarding healthcare? And number two, is it still reasonable to keep the unvaccinated healthcare workers on the sideline, not working, perfectly healthy and able to work, when the evidence that the government put forward, such as their claims of increased COVID amongst the unvaccinated, increased transmission of COVID amongst the unvaccinated, hence you cannot mix the two groups, when in fact, what we have done, and this is quite different than from a regular trial, if you like, when you are presenting your own evidence. What we have done is that we have used the government's own words in their affidavits that they have filed. So in the government's affidavits, and these are affidavits filed not by Bonnie Henry, but by her assistant, a person by the name of Dr. Brian Emerson. So we have used the Emerson affidavits and the things that they claim and the references that they're using to make these claims to turn it around and attack the government. Because in the references that the government is referring to, it is in fact so contradictory to what Dr. Henry is doing. And so this is the key difference, in that we are not introducing new facts. We're not challenging the government with our science versus their science. We're basically saying to the judge, look, is it still reasonable that they are making these claims that there's an emergency and hence there's a need to keep the unvaccinated healthcare workers on the sideline? Whereas in fact, if you look at the government's record of evidence that they have put forward, it is actually contradictory to what the government is actually saying. And I think that the judge understands that. The government's lawyers get a chance to rebut next week, and then we get to rebut their rebuttal. So that's how it's going. For the second half of the week, it was the JCCF lawyers who were up presenting. And I wasn't in the courtroom when they presented. One of the key things with our legal team is that the government is going up against doctors, right? And so this is one area that we know well. And we have, I would say, a number of very sharp physicians who are actually going through all the government's science that they have put forward and extracting where the contradictions are. And I think that that is that's our key to why our arguments are so clear and so succinct. I hope that prevails. And so what has happened at the end of the week is that for the JCCF, they had two lawyers, and one of their lawyers didn't turn up. I think that she said that she was ill. I'm not sure when she's coming back. And there was a little bit of courtroom drama at the end of it because the government's lawyers wanted to adjourn until the JCCF, their second lawyer, could come back and finish that presentation. But the objection from our side is that, no, we don't want to adjourn. We want to go ahead. And the judge, in this case, ruled in our favor. So that's why the government, their lawyers, are going to have to come back next week and rebut our petition, which is a good thing. So, I think any further delay is good for the government, and that's what they want to do. but it's not going to happen. The other thing I'm going to say is that I was very pleasantly surprised in the judge's his attitude, and probably this was compared to a year ago when we first met with the judge. It seems like that since then the judge is more aware of the situation, is interested in our case, is asking very good questions, and he's very open about it. And so I think that bodes well for us, but we'll see. So far it's going well. I think we still have our work cut out for us, but I think that we're up to the challenge.
So the judge, when you say he's more aware, is this the same judge that you encountered last year?
It is the same judge.
So do you suspect he's had a change of heart, or what's your read on this? He's more empathetic to your cause, or?
No, I don't think necessarily empathetic. I think that over the past year, so much more is known, right? Consider that a lot of the mandates, let's say for travel, for masking, have been dropped. Mandates across the country have been dropped. The WHO has said that this is all over. This is very public knowledge. And so the judge must have been exposed to this. And so here comes a group of people. They're basically saying, well, in British Columbia, you still have this ongoing emergency situation. You still have these unvaccinated healthcare workers. It is quite different than the rest of the country. I'm sure that the judge is well aware of this. So I think that's probably what has happened. What has happened is that time has happened and things have moved on.
So when you talk about your lawyers pointing out the contradictions, can you talk more specifically on that topic? What type of contradictions?
Well, I would say that, let me give you an example, okay? So let's say Dr. Bonnie Henry says that if you want to work in healthcare, you have to get either the primary series booster or you have to get this new monovalent vaccine. The contradictions to it is that in their own record, they have cited evidence that viral load, viral shedding, infection, transmission is equivalent in those who are unvaccinated versus those who are vaccinated. In addition to that, in their own evidence, they have actually cited papers showing that there is far less durability of the primary series, in other words, the first two shots, such that after about, let's say, 6 months, there is no further advantage. So the healthcare workers who had the first two shots, it's now been about 2 years at least since then. Any advantage in the primary series is long gone compared to the unvaccinated group. This is all in their record.
That's very interesting. And I think it's a very clever strategy to use their own affidavits, like Dr. Brian Emerson, to use what he has issued or the references that he has made is quite clever.
Correct. And so I think that where our lawyers have succeeded in this is that they have been very, very surgical in a sense of just trying to identify a small crack in the government's arguments and attack that. Mm-hmm. We're not going after the whole thing. We're not talking about constitutional challenges. We're not talking about reinstatement of everybody with back pay. We're not talking about any of that. We're basically saying, is this still reasonable? And at some point, it has to end. You cannot have a forever emergency. It has to end. And everywhere else has ended it. So why is BC an outlier? And that's the key message in all of this.
Yeah, why BC? Can you share any other specific contradictions?
The government side, they're floundering to come up with good reasons as to why they need to maintain this emergency and why they need to keep healthcare workers on the side. And so the government has put forward their submissions as we have. We have seen the government submissions, and it's primarily to confuse the judge, because the judge is not there to judge science. Mm-hmm. And there have been a number of people who have reached out to us and said, oh, you need to tell your lawyers about this article, this type of thing. Make sure that your lawyers include this in their arguments. In fact, the lawyers have considered all of that we are not introducing new evidence. It's not going to be a he says, she says type of situation. We're going to use only what the government has said. And we're going to basically point out, well, you said this, but you're also saying this. This completely contradicts what you're saying. So an example of this would be one of the things that they're describing is wastewater analysis of COVID as a reflection of COVID in the community. And so they're talking about wastewater analysis, and there have been COVID cases, but in the government's own evidence, they have shown that the trend in terms of the amount of COVID that you can detect in the wastewater has been going down, straight down, probably over the last year, or 2 years or so. But what they're saying is they're saying that we need to do these wastewater analyses because it's a good reflection of the COVID in the community, without actually saying that, oh, by the way, the amount of COVID that we can actually identify has been going down. Now, there are a lot of scientific arguments why wastewater is not good. And scientific arguments is that, well, it depends on how many people are pooping at the same time. So, wastewater analysis, you're going to have to sample in different parts of British Columbia. And when the government is trying to tie COVID and its, let's say its lethality to age, wastewater analysis does not tell you the age of the person who's pooping, right? And so it's a way of trying to fudge things, to try and confuse things, to obfuscate things and make it difficult for the judge himself to try and figure out what the heck is going on. But again, we're using the government's own data to basically counter them.
That's right. You're poking holes in their submissions. What are the main submissions that you're seeing the government make?
Well, the main submissions that the government is trying to obfuscate is that they're trying to confuse the judge with early COVID management for, let's say, the Alpha or Delta strains, but we've moved on. We've moved on to Omicron. In fact, the most recent order by Dr. Bonnie Henry was October. So we basically want to say, well, we're not going to go back in history and talk about the mandates in November 2021. We want to talk about the October 2023 mandate, when things are now different. When we don't have Alpha, we don't have Delta, we only have this newer variant of Omicron, right. Which in fact is way more mild than ever before. And so that's what the government is trying to do, is trying to mix up all these severe cases of Omicron, is trying to put in data about hospitalization is just out of control, whereas in fact, hospitalization in BC was out of control before the pandemic. It's even worse now. And so, they're going to put in things like wastewater tells us one thing. And so it is not, they're not making it clear. They're just, if you like, all they're doing is they're just muddying the water, making the judge confused. Because as I was sitting there, I was thinking about what the judge has to do, right? And so the judge is also in a kind of a difficult situation, because the judge, number one, is not a scientist. He's making a decision on a challenge against the government at a time when, generally speaking, the judges or the entire judicial system is very deferential to the government. And probably in his own mind, he's thinking, well, if I let these unvaccinated healthcare workers come back, and if there is an explosion or an outbreak of cases in hospitals, will they all come back to blame me? From his perspective, he doesn't want to be that person, the judge who allowed the unvaccinated healthcare workers to come back, which led to an outbreak of COVID in the hospitals. That's what he's weighing up.
Has there been any precedence of that in all the other provinces in Canada?
No, there has not. None that we're aware of. And so one would have thought that it's unlikely to happen, but I can see that from a personal perspective, from the judge's perspective, he has to be really sure about this. And so, again, we're just using all the government's own data to basically say that the unvaccinated, in terms of their immunity against COVID, is every bit as good as the vaccinated, if not better. And in fact, the government has references to that effect. Mm-hmm. And so, at the end of the day, the judge also realizes that our healthcare system is in crisis. It probably would help to some extent to bring back these unvaccinated healthcare workers. But again, he has to balance it up against would there be any downsides to his decision?
So the lawyer or the judge, your sense is he is cautious, and your sense is he is well-intentioned?
Well, let's say I think he's very sympathetic to the fact that, number one, there have been thousands of healthcare workers who have been, impacted by this. He's sympathetic to the realization that our healthcare system is not in a good situation, but he needs to be differential to the government in that the government, who has the authority and one would have thought the expertise in knowing what is best, he has to defer to that. And so I would say that even if he is sympathetic and a number of people have been harmed, at the end of the day, he has to judge what is legal and what isn't.
But how is BC different from other provinces in terms of that legality?
I think BC is different because we have Dr. Bonnie Henry, and that's why we're different.
Which means Dr. Bonnie Henry is not relying on science, or what's going on with Dr. Bonnie Henry? Why do you think she's so extreme?
I think the reason is that now this is my personal belief, because if you read the science and if you look at your own data, you know that the number of cases is going down. The number of hospitalizations and deaths is going down. The criteria you set up in terms of the diagnosis based on PCR is not 100% reliable. Yet overall, you've got over 90 and 95% of the population vaccinated. So from that perspective, if that's what you want to achieve with so-called herd immunity through vaccination, then you have achieved it. The fact is that COVID is really going away. You have said it. You have said that COVID is going to be with us probably forever. But we're going to manage it like we manage any other respiratory infection. And in fact, she has said that, and we have actually used that against that. So the provincial health officer already admits to the fact that it is an endemic situation. So the real reason is, if it's endemic and the unvaccinated, in all likelihood, have natural immunity because it's endemic, why are you not bringing them back? So the only conclusion I have is that this is ideologically driven. There is absolutely no science behind any of this. And so in our province, unfortunately, the policies that are still in place are ideologically driven compared to other places where maybe they're not so ideologically driven. They're driven more by reviewing what is available in terms of published scientific studies. And that's the primary difference. The other issue is that, and again, this is my opinion, maybe Dr. Henry is under the gun by the Minister of Health, and he is the ideologue. And he's the one that, for whatever reason, wants to keep these unvaccinated healthcare workers on the sideline. I don't know. I'm guessing maybe he thinks that they are all non-NDP supporters. I find that rather unusual because the vast majority of the unvaccinated healthcare workers are union members, the nurses. And so I don't know what's going on, but there is no, to me, rational reason for what is actually happening in BC. Now, a rational reason is not any type of way to actually introduce it into a court, right? Nobody wants to hear about a rational reason. People want to hear about what is factual and what is legal.
So the ideology that Dr. Bonnie Henry may be holding on to, expand on what you think that ideology is.
Oh, this is just pure speculation. Mm-hmm. I'm speculating that she was challenged and she lost by trying to introduce mandatory flu vaccinations for nurses. Back in 2018, I think the challenge was in something like 2019, and she lost. And maybe she has, and this is speculation, maybe she has an axe to grind against the nurses. And so who knows?
That may explain this persistence. What is the situation across Canada with mandatory vaccines for nurses?
The situation
prior to COVID.
Prior to COVID?
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, there was I don't know for sure, but I suspect that it was probably on an elective basis. So you could choose, such as, what happened in BC regarding flu vaccines is that you could choose to have the flu vaccine when it was recommended that you have it. Or if you didn't take it, then you had to be, as a healthcare worker, you had to mask up at work. And I suspect that that probably was a similar policy across the country, but I don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm. So maybe Bonnie Henry is just more militant or aggressive in her position.
Well, she comes from a military background. That's for sure. She was in the Canadian military for some time.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. Now, is Dr. Bonnie Henry going to be present and speak?
No, unfortunately, that's one of the things that I have also learned, because we're actually asking the judge to rule on her mandates. And yes, she herself, number one, does not need to appear, and number two, does not actually need to put in her own affidavit. She can put in the affidavit of her junior member, which I find is quite intriguing. Like, why wouldn't you put in what you really think is going on?
That does seem odd. It's as though there's a protective bubble around her, almost like Teflon, that she can't be touched. And yet she's the one giving the directives, but no one can question her directly. There's like no accountability in a sense.
Well, we're getting accountability now, but it is unfortunate that she doesn't make a personal appearance here or doesn't put in a personal affidavit. But I think that's just the way it's set up, And so I gather that this is not unusual when you're questioning a government official.
So they are, in a sense, above the law.
Well, I wouldn't say above the law, because we're now in a court of law, arguing over the orders that she has put forward.
Yes, and yet she does not need to defend her orders.
Not personally.
Remarkable.
It is.
It's a little bit alarming.
It is. Well, it's interesting and disappointing both at the same time.
I agree. Now, what is the best case scenario or outcome? This judicial review will wrap up after one more week, right?
Correct. And then the judge is going to need to take some time to make his decision. So we expect his decision will probably come out sometime in the new year, maybe late January or February. The best outcome for us, obviously, is if the judge rules in our favor, saying that there is no longer an emergency, which would deny the provincial health officer to have all these sweeping powers. And secondly, the unvaccinated healthcare workers may go back to work, just like everywhere else in Canada. That would be the best for us.
Right. So didn't you say that Dr. Bonnie Henry has already stated that there is no, in some forms, there is no emergency anymore, right?
Well, she has basically said that indirectly. She's basically said, in her orders, she claims that there is still an ongoing emergency and a need to be vigilant against future variants. But at the same time, she has also said, these are not in her orders, these are from, I would say, videos of her when she was speaking publicly, saying that COVID is now very mild. We've got a lot of vaccines into the population. There's a good amount of community immunity as a result of this. The variants are not of much concern. It is now endemic. We should be able to handle this like we handle all other respiratory viruses. There is a difference. She, on one hand, when she's talking publicly, she's not saying there is no more emergency. When she's talking in her mandate, she's saying there is an emergency.
Exactly. Very contradictory. So these are the type of contradictions that your lawyers are pulling out.
That is correct.
Do you have any expert witnesses like Dr. Stephen Pellick, who can talk about, the immunity of the unvaccinated as being on par or superior? Do you have expert witnesses like him who are able to present?
We do, and we have provided that evidence. The government also has an expert witness, and they have submitted their evidence as well. We have used the government's expert witnesses, their conclusions and their references that they use to make the conclusions and turn it around to attack the government, to show the inconsistencies that their own expert witness is saying.
That's interesting. So you're not introducing new expert witnesses. to support your claim, you're using their expert witnesses and poking holes in their arguments.
Correct. We have expert witnesses and we have introduced the opinions from our expert witnesses, but we're not relying on that. We're primarily using whatever evidence the government has put forward and turning around and using against them.
Which is, I like the sound of that strategy. It keeps
Correct.
it simple and it's very targeted.
Yes. And so I would say that there have been a number of people who have come up to me either personally or through emails saying that you should, tell your lawyer this, introduce this. And I must say to all of them, thanks very much, for that suggestion. It's very interesting, but in fact, our case is very solid the way it is.
Exactly.
We really cannot introduce new information, number one, that the government has not seen before. And number two, we're not going to introduce studies to allow the government to then turn around and say, well, this is kind of a lousy study. We have a better study. And then it becomes a he said, she said thing. Exactly. We're not going there. We're not going there. It's very clear what we're doing. Right.
It's very strategitic. So what is the track record of the law firm that you're working with?
I don't know. I don't know. The main lawyer, Peter Gall, they used to call it Queen's Counsel, and now it's called King's Counsel. And I think that represents a very high standard that you have to achieve. Right.
And so your group has worked with him all along. You did not change legal representation.
Our group was recommended to go with their firm.
Right. And so you are part of the doctors. Let me just get the name of the group that you are part of is the Canadian, remind me here.
So I'm a member of the Canadian Society for Science and Ethics in Medicine. Our petition includes our group as well as a nursing group.
And the nursing group is also then represented by Peter Gall.
Correct.
And then you've got JCCF lawyers representing who?
They represent healthcare workers. I think they represent the healthcare workers are. I don't know them. I haven't read their affidavits. I think they are healthcare administrators, physicians, possibly nurses, and so it's kind of similar, to our group.
But you said that they're taking a different strategy, perhaps slightly less effective. What strategy do you see them taking?
Well, I haven't actually been in the courtroom, so I haven't actually heard what strategy they're taking. I know that because I was there when I was there and our lawyer had finished, the judge had basically said to the JCCF lawyer that you have a very large application and you have included a number of scientific articles or reports. I am not in a position to judge science. That's what the judge says. And so I think he doesn't like it, and so he's not going to get into, because number one, he's not a physician or a scientist. He's not going to get into a situation where he has to judge, is your study better than the government study, this type of thing.
Right. So we talked about possible outcomes. Let's talk more about possible outcomes. So the best case scenario you outlined, tell me some more possibilities.
Well, the other possibility is that we are denied, right? And if we're denied, it's going to affect not just us, but all British Columbians, because you're not going to have access to the thousands of healthcare workers, experienced, willing to work. They're going to leave. And I think that's the worst case outcome. There is an outcome in between. And the outcome in between is that the healthcare workers are allowed to come back to work. But in fact, and this this has also happened in other situations where the unvaccinated have come back to work and there is, I wouldn't call it outright hostility, but there isn't the camaraderie at work anymore that you used to have. And I've spoken to two groups about this. It's very sad, to hear when people say, well, we worked with our coworkers for decades, maybe more. We worked very well together, but as a result of COVID, and then we had to make a decision, and then we were split apart. And so when you come back to work, people will say, I don't know what they would say, but I don't know what they would think. And it was like, well, you didn't take one for the team. We were here, we had to work without you. We had to work harder without you. Even though we got vaccinated, we all got sick anyway. our absenteeism is really sky high. You know, without actually admitting to the fact that you probably were smarter not to get vaccinated. You've been out of work, but you're healthy. I don't know what that will be. I think that's a third scenario, in that if you make people unwelcome back to work, that would be a bad outcome too. Because if you're made unwelcome, you're probably going to leave. So I think that the longer this goes on, the more likely, since COVID's over, and the government has to recognize that this has to end at some point. But the longer this goes on, the longer that separation, that chasm will just enlarge between these two groups, and I think that's very unfortunate.
That is really unfortunate, and yet it's understandable. There would be that sense that I succumbed to the vaccine, something which probably I didn't want, but I took out of an obligation, or I took it to keep my job. And now you prance back in here and you're back working, and you did what I wish I had done. I think subconsciously there would be resentment. So
I think so.
Completely understandable. And it's so unfortunate because everyone is a victim here. And
yes,
do you sense that the vaccinated healthcare workers resent or regret their decision?
I think that there is considerable regret over their decision. We just don't know how many. Because I think that, let's say, the most common thing is that since the vaccine cannot prevent infection or transmission, the mere fact that you're going to take it and you're going to get sick with COVID regardless. And so the realization is that, hey, I took this vaccine. It's supposed to help me not get sick, but I got sick anyway. And so I don't know at what point, hopefully they only took, the primary series too. But if they took more, if they took 4 or 5, 6 shots, the more shots you take, the worse you're going to be. And so that is also clearly borne out. There are a number of studies that have shown that. And probably as a worker, you probably have seen your coworkers, every one of them who's all vaccinated, they're all off sick. So I think that there is a lot of regret over that. And I'm sure that people would say, if I had to do it again, I don't know what I would do. It never should have been mandatory. It should have been an elective situation. It should have been like, the previous flu vaccine, where you had the option. You could either take the vaccine or wear a mask. I think that there definitely is regret. Now, if someone was severely injured from the vaccine, and fortunately it is rare, but if you get injured, it's potentially very serious. And I know that there's still a lot of denial, especially amongst physicians. You're not allowed to talk about this openly. But if you are the victim, let's say, of a severe vaccine injury, there's got to be considerable regret over the fact that you chose this in order to keep your job. Now, let's say you can't do your job. It's horrible.
Oh, it's such a tragedy. So unnecessary. Talk about the absenteeism that you're witnessing in the healthcare sector amongst the vaccinated healthcare workers.
Well, I'm not working, so I'm not witnessing anything. But from what I read, absenteeism is really quite high. I think the normal absenteeism is maybe about 2 to 3% of the working population. Let's say the healthcare workers. At the height of Omicron, absenteeism was about 10%. 3 to 5 times higher than the normal expected.
And since the vaccine was introduced, what is absenteeism? Have you seen any data?
I haven't seen any data on that. But I imagine that absenteeism is, it's still there, because absenteeism may not simply just be from COVID. Absenteeism may be from the fact that you're overworked now, because your coworkers are off sick, so you got to put in more shifts. You got to work harder. Obviously that will have an impact on your health as well. So I suspect that absenteeism is still quite high.
Yes. Well, this is something that employers are complaining about across Canada, across the world, is that everyone is sick. The number of sick days have skyrocketed, and these are with the vaccinated employees. So it's not unique to the healthcare sector. I think it's across the board. So talk to me more about the number of healthcare workers that used to be in BC. For example, the number of members of the nurses union before and after COVID.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I sort of stumbled upon that because something else I'm really interested in is in Bill 36. And I tried to understand the origin of Bill 36. It was written by a UK regulator by the name of Harry Caton. So Harry Caton, he issued his report known as the Caton Report in 2018. And reading through the report, what struck me as very interesting was the fact that Mr. Caton had actually identified the total number of healthcare workers in BC, the largest of which, and this is 2018, was represented by the BC Nurses Union, which is the union for all the nurses. It's for the registered nurses, the LPNs, the care aides, practical nurses. And at that time in 2018, the total number of nurses, 55,000 in British Columbia. So I thought that was really kind of interesting statistic. So I very simply looked up the BC Nurses Union in 2023, and they have 48,000 members. So they're short 7,000 nurses. And I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting figure. Now, I was trying to relate to the fact that, are these the nurses who left during COVID and were never replaced? And then because the official government statistic on the number of terminated healthcare workers is around about 3,000. But that's only the terminated healthcare workers. It does not include any of the workers who basically took early retirement, like myself, which is estimated to be anywhere maybe up to about 3 times that number. So 8 or 9,000 healthcare workers in total left as a result of the COVID mandates. Now, of that, the vast majority of healthcare workers are nurses. So if you think that 8 or 9,000 at the time left, then quite simply, 7,000 of them probably were nurses. Mm-hmm. So if 7,000 nurses were either took early retirement or were terminated with the COVID mandates, that in fact coincides with a difference in the total number of nurses represented by the BC Nurses Union of about 7,000. So what I'm saying is that the nurses who have left as a result of the COVID mandates, the total number has not been replenished. Adrian Dix may go on and talk about all these foreign nurses that he's hiring, but the foreign nurses in all likelihood probably are only keeping up with normal attrition as a result of increasing age and taking retirement by the current nurses who have been vaccinated. It in no way replenishes the absent 7,000 nurses. And in fact, the likelihood is that it's impossible to replace these 7,000 nurses because you're not going to get an infusion of 7,000 foreign nurses. I was reading an interesting article today that in the Philippines, where the majority of these foreign nurses come from, the Philippines government is now looking at why they have over 200,000 excess deaths in the Philippines. And very soon they're going to be tying it to vaccination. Given that, if that comes out, do you think the Filipino nurses would come to BC where there is mandatory COVID vaccination, whereas in their own country, they're going to show that there's excess mortality, especially amongst the younger working population of death, likely as a result of the COVID vaccine? I think that this is going to be a real eye-opener. For them, it's going to change a lot of the dynamics. I think that it's also happening right now where you have far fewer recruitments to nursing. It's going to be harder to actually find nurses to replace the missing 7,000 positions. So how are we possibly going to get our healthcare system, back online? We're no amount of money by simply throwing at this problem is going to correct it. There has to be some quite significant changes that have to be made.
Well, and you made a comment in an earlier conversation that the vast majority of the nurses that left were seasoned, experienced,
that's right,
high-level nurses.
That's right.
So how do you replace those?
You can't.
You can't. So here, people like you, you're an experienced surgeon from BGH, you're a professor of surgery from, UBC, and now you're out. You've been required to leave because you would not disclose your vaccine status. So we have high-level professionals like you who are no longer in the system. And we have a crisis, a healthcare crisis. I mean, everyone in BC is talking about it. The most logical course of action is to bring all of you back with a carrot, lure you back, because I'm sure some of you who took early retirement, have decided, no, it's a toxic environment in BC. I don't want to be back. But in my mind, I would be enticing you back because we're desperate in BC.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I was speaking to one of my physician colleagues, and he's a member of our physician group, CSIM. He's now in the States, and so he's in Ohio, and he's a general surgeon. He's probably early to mid-career, has a young family. So he's doing okay financially. His family's happy in Ohio, but he absolutely hates their healthcare system. He hates what he's doing. He can't wait to come back to British Columbia, if only he was allowed to. And that's just terrible. It's absolutely terrible. This is
heartbreaking.
It is. This is his home. He's been forced to go to another country. He's probably okay, but he's not practicing and contributing in the best way possible.
And I have two family members. I have two nieces who are nurses, mid-20s. Both of them cannot work. And the irony is both of them worked in the COVID ward. And then they were shown the door when they refused the vaccine.
Right.
And they're mid-20s, they're fresh, they're young, they're healthy, they're never sick, and they're eager to work. Neither of them have been able to find, comparable work. I think one of them is working doing oral, dental surgery, and the other has not been able to find nursing work, of course, and can't leave. Very, very often these younger nurses, they can't leave the province. They have families, they have spouses. It's not so easy to go to Alberta or another province to welcome them. And it's heartbreaking.
It's
heartbreaking.
The absolute worst story I heard, and this was told to me by a nurse. In fact, she worked on our ward, and she told me that for her last shift, and she knew she was going to get terminated at the end of it, they came up to her at the end of her shift and said, and pleaded, can you please do another shift? And these are 12-hour shifts. So she, like a good, dutiful nurse, did an additional 12 hours and then got fired. Can you imagine your employer knows that you're short, wants you to work an extra shift, and then fires you at the end? That's criminal.
It's criminal. I'll share another story. In my husband's family in Kelowna know of a nurse who got the first vaccine and it made her go blind.
Oh gosh.
So she refused the second vaccine because she was now blind. So they fired her.
Huh.
Okay, so here she is without disability. She was terminated because she refused the second vaccine, but she's blind as a vaccine injury. Immediately after the vaccine, she went blind and has not recovered. And this is the lunacy. It's insanity. I don't know any other way to depict it, but it's very, very discouraging. Do you suspect, give me your best guesstimate of what you think the outcome is going to be here, because it's so important in our province. Are you optimistic?
I would like to say that we are, but it's still a coin toss, because the judge still has to show deference to the government, right? The only good thing is that all the other governments have allowed the healthcare workers to come back, so it's not as if he has to go out on a limb. Our arguments are very good, and so I think it maybe if they separated the petitions, probably the judge will look favorably upon us, and I certainly hope so. But I still think that it's a bit of a coin toss, and we're just going to have to wait to see what the government lawyers come back with.
Yes.
In a way, I'm kind of surprised that it has gone on for so long, especially with so much more evidence, coming out, the other provinces dropping the mandates. The WHO says it's over. Why in BC are we still doing this? It doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense. And your comment about the Philippines with so many excess deaths there, and it doesn't, these nurses in the Philippines are going to quickly realize the vaccine is detrimental to their health. Why would they come to BC where they're requiring a vaccine that is no longer effective?
That's correct.
The vaccine number 1 and 2 are not effective anymore. They're it's redundant. So it seems so strange. I mean, is that an argument that's being brought up at all? That why are you mandating a vaccine that has clearly been declared to be ineffective?
Right. And so, Yeah. So specifically for these Filipino nurses, why wouldn't you go to a place that doesn't have a vaccine mandate?
Exactly.
You know, so why would
Exactly.
you come here? Like,
And why would you come into a very toxic environment? Because I would imagine it's pretty toxic in the BC
right.
system right now. I thought it was quite intriguing on the American Thanksgiving. The CDC on Twitter made an announcement and said, because of all the family gatherings over Thanksgiving, everyone go and get your booster. 99% of the comments on Twitter were very negative, violent.
Right. Right.
I found that fascinating. Comments like, I would rather eat raw turkey than get another vaccine. So
right.
What I found intriguing was on the CDC website, when they made this announcement, the response was very negative. No one wants a vaccine anymore. Anyone who has done their homework realizes that perhaps they shouldn't have, and they don't want anymore.
Yeah.
So it is bizarre that Bonnie Henry is holding on to this so persistently.
Yeah, but the Americans are quite different from us, and so I think that in terms of the booster uptake amongst Americans, it's very low. My guess is that probably 10 to 15%. But I think amongst British Columbians, booster uptake is maybe about 40%. It's quite surprising why the population here believes Bonnie Henry so much.
It's almost like mind control, that whisper. She sounds like a primary school teacher, and it elicits maybe trust. It's peculiar.
Yes. Peculiar. Well, yeah, I never listened to her, so maybe I'm not under my control.
No, I make a point of not listening to her as well. In terms of flu shots, is there more hesitancy now for flu shots, do you think? Are people skeptical across the board with any vaccines now?
I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that in British Columbia, probably not so much. Sad to say. In other areas, primarily the States, I think that there's a lot of hesitancy, especially over all of the childhood vaccines.
Yes, that's what I've heard. In the U.S., there's been a huge drop in flu vaccines and childhood vaccines. People are just saying no. They're realizing that no vaccines have ever been tested with a placebo, which is when you first hear that, you think, no, how can that be? Every medicine must be checked or tested against a placebo, except vaccines. And yet vaccines are so widely distributed. It's bizarre.
It is. Yeah.
Does that make any sense to you?
No, but a lot of things don't make sense anymore.
No, it feels like the world is upside down. One quick question. Patricia Daly is quite a big figure in Vancouver with the Vancouver Health Authority. And she made some peculiar comments that I was maybe reading between the lines. She was kind of contradicting Bonnie Henry sometimes. She made a plea for UBC students and professors not to be vaccinated, not to mandate it, and made a suggestion that people be vaccinated, that the government wanted people to, the mandates were in place to get the numbers up, not to prevent COVID, but to get the numbers up. Do you sense that Patricia Daly is a little bit of a rebel? What's your sense of her? Have you watched her at all?
Well, I know Patricia Daly since I worked at VGH, and that's where she is too. She's not the only one who has made comments like this. I think that there are a number of physicians who are saying this, but usually they're using it as a result or because they have done published research that supports what they're saying, or they're reading the published articles in a way that supports what they're saying. They're very careful with their words, though, because they're still employed, and I can understand that you don't want to come out as be an extreme rebel, because you likely will get terminated. If you said something that was really quite drastic compared to the official narrative from the provincial health officer. But I think it's good that, that they are speaking out based on their observations, based on their science. So I think, I welcome it. We have used some of Patricia Daly's comments directly and said that here is a medical officer, and this is what the medical officer is saying.
Exactly, because she has directly contradicted Bonnie Henry many times, but like you say, very carefully. And you almost have to read between the lines when she speaks. But I found her to be, I always liked her before COVID. I always respected her. And I was actually surprised that she didn't speak up immediately. But maybe for her, it was a choice between the position and, She would
Yeah.
maybe she'd be in your boat. She would have been dismissed. However, do they have to get the vaccine? Do people like Patricia Daly have to get it, or are they immune?
Oh, no. They all have to get it. If you are a physician working in a hospital, you have to be vaccinated. The only physicians who do not are those physicians who are in so-called private practice. In other words, you have your own office, like a family doctor. You don't go into the hospital at all. And there you have the option of whether you want to be vaccinated or not. But if you are working in a hospital, you have to get vaccinated. I got a little reminder that my phone is going to die within a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. We'll wrap this up then. So essentially, the vaccine mandate does apply to these people. One quick question is, do you think, because often I've heard that healthcare workers have been encouraged to go to healthcare clinics or vaccine centers within the hospital. And some doctors in Toronto have told me that the people in their hospitals who have suffered injuries or died did not go to the hospital clinics. They went outside to public clinics. Have you heard that at all? Circulating?
I have not heard that. You know, I am aware that there's some batches are worse than others, but I'm not aware of any conscious effort to put bad batches in one area versus another. So I don't know about that. But that's very unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate. I spoke to someone who's with the U.S. embassies, and they told me that they were mandated to go to their in-house vaccine clinics, not to go to the community ones. And I thought that was intriguing. And that also was the case with a lot of the pharmaceutical companies. They had in-house clinics where their staff were to go. So my sense is the batches are not all the same.
Correct. The batches are not the same.
And we know that. How bad is your batch shows a clear clustering of injuries from certain batches. It's not random. The injuries are not random. So, well, you know what, Dr. Hsiang, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the update. If we can, I think at the end of next week, we could perhaps speak again, and you can give us an update on the second week of this judicial review in BC. But thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome.
Okay, keep up the fight. And may this coming week be a good one.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.